Welcome back to Deep Dark Depths. Tonight, we descend into a terrifying story of isolation, forgotten souls, and the echoes of death. We often believe our homes are our sanctuaries, safe havens where the chaos of the outside world cannot possibly reach us. But sometimes, the walls themselves hold memories, trapping the energy of previous inhabitants who are not quite ready to leave yet. I was 25 when I finally found a place of my own, desperate to escape the noise of crowded, shared housing. The apartment was located in a structure built in the 70s, carrying that distinct, heavy architectural style of a bygone era. Walking down the hallway felt like stepping back in time, with faded carpets and the faint, lingering smell of old tobacco. Despite the age of the building, the price was right, and the silence of the empty room felt like pure freedom. I stood in the center of the living room, breathing in the stale air, feeling a profound sense of ownership and pride. The first few hours were spent unpacking my life, filling the empty void with my books, my clothes, and my presence. By 10 o'clock, the heavy lifting was done, and I sat back to enjoy the absolute quiet of my new sanctuary. The city outside seemed distant and muffled, as if the thick concrete walls were shielding me from the rest of humanity. I turned off the main lights, letting darkness swallow the corners of the room, feeling safe in my own private fortress. That first night was supposed to be the best sleep of my life, a reward for all the hard work moving. I stared up at the ceiling, tracing the patterns in the plaster, listening to the settling sounds of the old structure. It started subtly, a sound so faint that I thought it was just the blood rushing through my own tired ears. I held my breath, straining to listen against the silence, trying to identify the source of the rhythmic, soft noise. It sounded like a machine, or perhaps a distant pump, working rhythmically somewhere deep within the bowels of the building. I convinced myself it was just the plumbing, old pipes expanding and contracting as the temperature dropped during the night. Old buildings make noise, I told myself repeatedly, trying to force my mind to ignore the disturbance and drift to sleep. But sleep did not come easily that night, as the rhythm seemed to sync perfectly with my own anxious heartbeat. Morning brought relief, the sunlight washing away the shadows and the fear, making the night's anxieties seem foolish and irrational. I went about my day, unpacking the last few boxes, convincing myself that the adjustment period was perfectly normal for everyone. Yet every time I walked past the bedroom door, I felt a strange coldness, a hesitation I could not explain. As the sun began to set again, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black, the dread returned to me. I found myself waiting for it, anticipating the return of that sound, sitting in the dark like a prey animal. Right on cue, as the city traffic died down, the rhythm started again. Thump, thump, like a slow, heavy drum. I pressed my ear against the wall, thinking perhaps it was a neighbor playing music or watching a movie too loud. But the wall was silent and cold. The sound wasn't coming from next door. It felt like it was inside. My gaze drifted up to the ventilation grate. It sounded wetter now, less like a machine and more like breathing. I dragged a chair over and climbed up to inspect it, shining my flashlight into the dusty, dark, metal throat. There was nothing there but endless galvanized steel and dust bunnies. No animals, no loose fans, just empty metal tunnels. I climbed down, feeling foolish but also deeply unsettled. If it wasn't the vent, where was the breathing coming from? I went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, trying to wash away the creeping sense of paranoia. As I dried my face, the sound changed. It became distinct, a rasping inhalation followed by a heavy, wet exhalation. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing right there in the doorway, but the hallway was empty and silent. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and checked every closet, every corner, looking for an intruder, a rat, anything tangible. But the apartment was secure. The windows were locked, the deadbolt was engaged. I was completely and utterly alone here. Exhaustion finally overtook fear. I sat on the floor, listening to the sound which seemed to be mocking my sanity. When I finally slept, my dreams were filled with suffocating darkness and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. I woke up on the floor, stiff and sore. The sun was shining, but the warmth didn't reach my bones. I needed to get out. I left the building, desperate for human contact and the reassuring noise of the city. I tried to call friends to explain what was happening, but how do you describe a haunting without sounding insane? On my return, I saw the superintendent in the lobby, a grumpy old man who had worked there for decades. I approached him, trying to sound casual, and asked if there had been any complaints about noise or plumbing recently. He looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of pity and suspicion, before shaking his head slowly. "Detailed plumbing work was done years ago," he grumbled. "Nobody else hears anything. You just need to get used to it." I walked to the elevator, feeling his eyes drilling into my back. He knew something. I was certain of it. The elevator ride up felt like an ascent to the gallows. The metal box creaked and groaned with every floor. Stepping out onto my floor, the atmosphere was heavy. The air felt thicker, charged with a static electricity that raised hairs. I stood before my door for a long minute, listening. Silence. But it was a waiting silence, not an empty one. Inside, a new element had been added to the sensory assault. A faint, sweet, sickly smell hung in the air. I checked the trash, the fridge, the drains. Nothing was rotten. The smell seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. As night fell, I turned on every single light. I wanted no shadows, no corners for anything to hide in. I put on noise-canceling headphones and tried to work, blasting music to drown out the silence and the fear. Curiosity got the better of me. I started searching online for the history of the building, looking for tragedies. Most of the history was mundane. Zoning disputes, minor fires, rent strikes. Nothing that explained the breathing or the smell. Then, the power cut. The music in my headphones died, and the sudden silence hit me like a physical blow. In the dark, the breathing was instant. It wasn't distant anymore. It sounded like someone standing right behind my chair. I froze, my muscles locking up. I could feel the air shift, a cold draft hitting the back of my neck. It was a wet, rattling breath. The sound of lungs filled with fluid, struggling to pull in just enough oxygen. With a scream caught in my throat, I whipped around, shining my phone light into the darkness behind me. Empty. Again. Just the furniture casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and reach out towards me. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't budge. The mechanism felt fused, holding me inside. I pounded on the wood, shouting for help, hoping a neighbor would hear me, but my voice seemed swallowed by the walls. Just as suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The lock clicked, and the door swung open a fraction of an inch. I stumbled out into the hallway, collapsing against the opposite wall, gasping for air like a drowning man surfacing. A door opened down the hall. A woman peered out, looking at me with annoyance. "Keep it down," she hissed. I asked her about my apartment. Her expression changed instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a deep, unsettling pity. "You really don't know?" she whispered, glancing at my open door as if expecting something to come rushing out. She refused to say more, telling me to ask the management, and quickly shut her door, locking it loudly. I was left alone again. I couldn't go back in there, not yet. I needed answers before I faced that room. I spent the night in a cheap motel down the street. The bed was hard, but at least it was silent. The next morning, I went to the public library. If the internet wouldn't tell me, the physical archives surely would. I spent hours scrolling through microfiche, scanning obituaries and police reports for my building's address from the last decade. Finally, I found it. A small article buried on page 6 from 5 years ago. Tenant found deceased in apartment 4B. My apartment. The name of the deceased was Michael Harris. He was a recluse who lived alone and died of natural causes. But it wasn't the death that was horrific. It was the timeline. Michael had died of severe respiratory failure. He collapsed in the living room, unable to call for help. And there he lay, undiscovered, for over 6 weeks. The article explained that a faulty ventilation system had created a vacuum, keeping the smell of decay trapped inside the apartment. Neighbors only complained when the vent system finally failed completely, releasing weeks of accumulated decomposition into the hallway. I felt sick. I had been sleeping in the exact spot where a man had slowly rotted away for a month. Knowing the truth changed everything. The apartment wasn't just old. It was a tomb that had been scrubbed clean. I found the superintendent again. I didn't ask questions this time. I just showed him the article. He sighed heavily. "We cleaned it," he said defensively. "Professional biohazard team. Stripped the floors, painted everything. It's safe, physically." I asked why he didn't tell me. He mumbled something about not being legally required to disclose deaths after 3 years. Legally safe, perhaps, but spiritually? I was living in a space that had been saturated with death and loneliness. When I opened the door, the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't faint anymore. It was the thick, sweet stench of rot. I looked at the floorboards in the living room. I could almost see the outline of where he had lain. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my suitcase and started throwing clothes in, panic driving my movements. I needed to leave now. Outside, a storm had broken. Rain lashed against the windows like gravel, and thunder shook the very foundations of the building. The power failed again. I froze, suitcase half-packed. The silence returned, heavy and expectant, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The breathing started immediately, but it wasn't just behind me this time. It was all around me, filling the room. I swung my light around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Who's there?" I screamed. A flash of lightning illuminated the bedroom doorway, and there, for a split second, I saw him. A dark, standing shape. It wasn't a solid person. It was a coalescence of shadows, a dense patch of darkness that absorbed the lightning. I scrambled back, tripping over my own boxes, falling hard onto the floor. The flashlight rolled away, beams spinning wildly. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, dragging steps. Wet sounds, like bare feet slapping against the wood, moving towards me. I curled into a ball, squeezing my eyes shut. "Michael!" I screamed into the darkness. "I know you're here!" The footsteps stopped instantly. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. I waited, trembling. Then, right against my ear, I felt a breath, cold as ice, smelling of old earth and decay. A voice, dry as dead leaves, rasped a single word directly into my auditory canal. "Help." I didn't wait for more. I scrambled up and bolted for the door, leaving my clothes, my books, everything behind. I tore down the hallway, convinced that the darkness was reaching out to grab my ankles and drag me back. I took the stairs, leaping down flights at a time, the sound of my own panic echoing like a second set of footsteps. I burst out into the rainy night, collapsing on the wet pavement, gasping the clean, cold air into my burning lungs. I looked up at my window. The lights were on, and standing there, looking down at me, was a dark silhouette. As I watched, paralyzed by rain and fear, the figure slowly dissolved into the darkness, and the lights flickered out. It took me a month to find a new place, a modern build, glass and steel, with no history and no ghosts. I hired movers to get my things. I never stepped foot in that building again. I thought I was free, but trauma has a way of lingering, of staining the mind long after the physical danger has passed. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the modern appliances hum their quiet tune, I wake up with a start. I listen to the silence of my new home. And sometimes, just on the edge of hearing, I think I hear it, a rhythmic, wet breathing. A reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. I lay there, eyes open, wondering if Michael followed me, or if he is simply a part of me now. Thank you for watching Deep Dark Depths. If you hear breathing tonight, don't look for the source. Just close your eyes